Those who know must teach. African proverb. Africans throughout the diaspora, we are in trouble. We are in trouble. We are in trouble because we are totally clueless of the information warfare that's been waged against us by the white society. The white society's exploitation of Africans has given it an era where it's flourished most throughout history. To allow this era to come to an end would be against the interests of the white society. So when the blatant subjugation tactics used in the past against black people by white society became no longer morally acceptable with the changing times and resulted in unprecedented unified black protests, the white society not abandoned its practices of subjugating black people and exploiting black people. They developed more covert ways that allows them to continue doing so without black people responding to the exploitation by manipulating us, utilizing what is called information warfare. At this present time, we have no leaders. We have no one who representing us nationally nor globally, because those blacks who are in place speaking in our behalf nationally and globally are doing so at the benefit of the white society. They give the illusion that they're pushing for our agendas when they're actually being paid by the white society to merely appease us, to give us the illusion that we are being, that we have a place at the table. We must understand how the white society continuously manipulate us, to allow them to continue their exploitation of us without any black resistance. Although the white society professes equality for all races, they are unrelentingly committed to the preservation of their white dominance. And no group has presented a greater threat against a system of white supremacy than black people do, because of our true hidden narratives. Our true hidden narratives that they hide from us makes us the greatest threat. There's also a fear of massive black retribution that secretly exists among the white society due to their long-term mistreatment of black people throughout history. So they control us through using information warfare that manipulates us to think in ways that serve the white society. They manipulate us to think in ways that are against our own interests and serve their interests. It's by deliberate design that many black people now perceive ourselves as being our own worst enemies and revere as whites in spite of a brutal history to the contrary. It's always by deliberate design whenever the oppressed thinks exactly as the oppressors want them to. We do so due to the white society's monopoly of information that we receive, regardless of how intelligent people are. If it's possible to control the information they receive, it's entirely possible to control what they believe. Presently, throughout the diaspora, millions of Africans who've been displaced through slavery throughout history feel indebted to the white society. We feel that slavery benefited us. Therefore, many of us feel ashamed to even seek our reparations. That's because the white society determined a long time ago, by denigrating the image of Africa, by making us be embarrassed of our African heritage, it increases our allegiance towards the white society. It literally makes us feel indebted to the white society for enslaving our ancestors. That's why they denigrate the image of Africa. This is why they never show the beautiful cities in Africa. We are made to feel that our enslavement was ultimately a rescue mission. They're also miseducated to believe that we come from nothing. This instills feelings of inferiority into our subconscious mind by telling us that we Africans, through our diaspora, we have no history. Because when the white society invaded, Africans were uncivilized and illiterate. Totally untrue. It was Africans who civilized the world. The first stone buildings were built in Africa. Africans were the first to smelt metal. Africans were the first to write, paint. The oldest university is in Africa. It was Africans who civilized Europe. But those are not the narratives that you're being taught. They teach us in our universities in the West that the first thing ever written was written by the Greeks. The Greeks civilized the world. The Greeks invented everything. But in reality, the Greeks received their education in Africa. But see, we're not being taught that. We're being taught a version of history that exalts whites and marginalizes us. Now, what does this do to us? It conditions us to accept our subordinate status within the white dominant society. That's what was happening in our school system. You know, most of us know that we learn more black racially affirming facts from each other than we do so in our school system, but we don't understand that there's a social science behind it. In order for a dominant group to maintain their position of dominance, they must condition the subordinate population to adhere to the authority and the dominance of the dominant society. This is achieved by denying the subordinate population of a racially affirming curriculum. When the oppressed are denied a racially affirming curriculum, this conditions us to perceive ourselves through a marginalized identity. This makes us feel more compliant with white dominance over our lives. The education we've been taught is a false one. In America, millions of African Americans don't know any positive narratives about themselves. Many Africans come from the Caribbean and from Africa looking down at African Americans, not realizing that they're seeing African Americans through the distorted lens created by the white society. The true narratives are this: after slavery was abolished in America, within 80 years following slavery, African Americans submitted 726 patents to the U.S. Patent Office. This more than doubled the number of patents submitted by whites. And this trend has never stopped. The hidden reality is this: most inventions that revolutionized the world were either invented by black people or inspired directly by invention by black people. But those that are narratives we're not hearing. We're hearing distorted narrative. The white society distorts narrative. In a sense, it instills a value system into society that maintains white dominance. And it achieves by distorting our narratives. Right now, many of us, right in our school, we believe that Thomas Edison is responsible for the light bulb. But here's the reality. When Thomas Edison patented his light bulb, no company has purchased it nor mass produced it because it was deemed not efficient enough. It lit very dimly and only lasted a few minutes. The light bulb that was purchased, mass produced, and its inventor sent around the world to oversee its installation was an African American named Lewis Latimer. So it is a black man why the world is lit up. You see, all societies function based upon the narratives that are fed into a society. People function based upon those narratives. So the narratives fed into our society are distorted to exalt whites and marginalize black people. This creates false assumptions within the society that aids maintain white dominance. These assumptions affect hiring, firing, promotions, and even film castings in ways that aids and maintain white dominance. According to social science, perception is more important than reality. So all is required for maintaining white dominance over blacks is to create the perception that whites are superior to blacks. Most people are clueless of the fact that without black people, no major cities across this world would look as they do with the tall skyscrapers. We have tall skyscrapers because black people invented the elevator, the air conditioning, central heating. Now, if not for these inventions, the tallest building would be 5 stories high because no one wants to walk more than 5 stories high into a building. Without the central heating, you couldn't have tall buildings because you would freeze on the top. Without air conditioning, you'd burn up on the top. The inventions of black people is why our society is what it is. But see, they marginalize our image, so we don't know this. The refrigerated truck that takes our grocery to the grocery store, the refrigerated truck was invented by a black person. Wasn't for a black person, we wouldn't have the cell phone. We wouldn't have the camera that's on our cell phone or the speaker on our cell phone. But you see, these narratives are not known. They show an image of black people that we only contribute through sports, or that our contribution to the Western society was done on our backs through slavery. But Africans have done more for the entire world with our brains than we do so with our bronze. But see, these are not the narratives. We are given an education that is designed to uphold the system of white supremacy. And as a result of this, the collective self-esteem and self-image of Caucasians has been falsely bolstered at the expense of those of black people. Then they condition us to perceive ourselves, call ourselves niggers, bitches, and hoes. And we think that we are the ones steering our culture when they're actually steering our culture. They negatively steer our culture through negative media social engineering. Most people think that their media reflects our reality, but the truth is most often we who imitate how we see ourselves in the media. People often become those derogatory media depictions of themselves that they accept as being their reality. The white society controls the black media image, so it's they who are telling us how black people are supposed to act, how we're supposed to dress. They started creating these black exploitation films. And in these black exploitation films, we were calling ourselves niggers and bitches, glorifying pimps. We rushed to the movies because we had never saw black people in leading roles before. So we flocked to those movies because here we are, we're now in leading roles. But we also started imitating those caricatures, those white derogatory caricatures of ourselves that we accept as being our reality. And in doing so, we've been conditioned to perceive ourselves through a fraudulent, false, marginalized identity that aids the white society in maintaining their dominance over us. Those of you who insist that we made the N-word ours and are using it empowers us, you are ignorant of your own ignorance. It's time to wake up from such profound ignorance. They condition us to call ourselves niggas because words have power over the subconscious mind. People start functioning based upon what they repeatedly call themselves. This is why men who call themselves thugs are more likely to engage in a fight than to avoid one. It's also the reason why women who proclaim themselves as being bitches often become stubbornly unreasonable. We function based upon what we call ourselves. When black people continue to call ourselves niggas, we are perceiving ourselves through a marginalized identity. Also, to diffuse, to oppress the people, you must diffuse their alpha males. When black men are conditioned to call themselves niggers, we are now functioning based upon a perceived marginalized identity. Those of us who call ourselves niggers are less likely to confront the system of white supremacy. If you don't believe this, you'll see it. You'll find that most men who sag their pants are those who call themselves niggers. You will find it difficult to find a black man who refused to call himself a nigger sagging his pants. You would notice that a person who refused to be called a nigger carries himself with a higher level of self-respect. Words affects us. There's a psychological war against our minds. And they have our minds so dumbed down and misdirected that we can't see this war. They have us believing that our plight is a result of a silly slave syndrome. The Willie Lynch myth would presents what would be the least effective method used for controlling generations of people. It's simply not how brainwashing works. True brainwashing requires a system that's being constantly reapplied upon the minds of a targeted population. If not, it loses its effect, not become worse as we witness among our people. Our people are being programmed to think in ways that serve system white supremacy. And the programming first starts through an early education development by a school curriculum that denies us of most racially affirming facts about ourselves. Therefore, we're being conditioned to accept white dominance over our lives. The programming then continues unrelentingly throughout our entire life through media subliminal programming, through a media that always shows us the fraudulent worst about ourselves. It controls us through demoralization. It uses this control system utilizes the immense power that shame and demoralization has upon the human mind to mentally enslave black people. When we constantly watching the media, the news, and all of our statistics are negative. And first of all, critically think. Some things are so obvious it's only by not critically thinking you can't see it. Can you not see how cartoonishly unrealistic it actually is that all narratives that we receive about ourselves in white society are negative about ourselves or favors them over us? Through repetition, it's designed to instill the myth of white superiority and black inferiority into our subconscious minds. It's also designed to turn our collective aggressions away from the white society and redirect against ourselves. For many black people, the demoralization is so great, we try to disassociate ourselves from being black. That's why we run around and say, oh, I'm part white, I have Cherokee in me. I'm not from Africa. We are embarrassed. We want to separate ourselves. It's how we try to disassociate ourselves from the pain of continually being demoralized. The white society keeps us believing the fraudulent works about ourselves. Look at it. Think in your lifetime, have you ever, when you watch the news, the media, disproportionately all of our narratives are negative. They tell us that black men are the worst. Black men makes the worst fathers, the worst husbands, the worst boyfriends. Black women are the least supportive. Black children are the most disruptive in school. Everything we learn about ourselves is negative. Now, when that continuously happening, it instills a value system in us that makes us more accepting of white society. And the programming is so strong that not only do we accept white dominance over our life, many of us prefer it. Many black people say, man, I prefer white dominance over blacks. We've been conditioned to see it. And here's what happens. Once a false belief has been successfully embedded into the human mind, the person then only notices those things that appear to confirm the belief and becomes psychologically blinded from seeing the things that refutes it. I'll give you an example. Let's say, for example, you've been made to believe that all Asian drivers were terrible drivers. You believe that, embedded in your mind. Now, when you see an Asian driver have an accident, you say, damn, those Asian drivers, they're terrible. When in reality, there are millions of more Asians who are excellent drivers, but you don't notice it. Those few that you've noticed, now I see it for myself, the Asians are the worst drivers. Untrue. We become psychologically blinded to see things, to only see what's embedded into our minds. Another example, if a black man is made to believe that black women are abrasive and rude and, always angry. If this black man goes to a barbecue, and at the barbecue there are 50 black women. If two of these black women starts arguing in the manner that's abrasive, that fits his embedded belief, he will look at those two women and say, see, I told you, black women are so damn abrasive. Totally clueless of the reality that the 48 other black women aren't doing it. So therefore, those women do not confirm his belief system, but he's become psychologically blinded from seeing it. This is a system that this illusionary truth effect is how the white society mentally enslaves black people. They embed things into our mind, and we believe those things, and we become mentally enslaved by those things. For example, another example, many black people insist that black people never support each other. We never support each other. We're like crabs in a bucket always pulling each other down. We never support each other. Now, those black people who said that are clueless of this reality. When Barack Obama was running for president, he received more black votes than any other president in U.S. history. In some places, because of polling regularities, how they give us less places to vote, black people stood in line for up to 5 hours to vote for Obama. On the night that he won the presidency, black people crying in the street, praising, celebrating his win, crying. At his inauguration, black people broke records showing up in Washington, D.C. and standing out in cold, record-breaking temperature to watch him be sworn in. The hotels were filled with black people at their own expenses. When Farrakhan asked 1 million black men to show up in Washington, 1 million black men showed up on their own dimes to support Farrakhan. When Trayvon Martin was killed, thousands of black people around the country traveled to Sanford, Florida to show support for the family, and they gave the family money. But there are those who don't see it. They insist that I saw it for myself. Black people never support each other. Here's the reality. Those black people who think they confirm their negative assessment are delusional, because it's not humanly possible for any individual to accurately assess the collective state of millions of people based upon their own experience. I'm going to prove that to you. If I walk out of my house and every day I saw a black man kill another black man, every day for a year, 365 days a year, that's 365 homicides. Even if I saw that, 365 is not even 1% of the over 55 million black people in America. So even with that, if I could see that, that's not enough to accurately assess the over 55 million black people in America. Now, the average person, they don't see certain things, they see 3 or 4 things. But because of the programming, of the white society's programming, they program us to believe that we are our own worst enemies because it's how they prevent us from unifying against them. During the 1960s, white social scientists had to study the African American culture to find what was the cause of the unprecedented unified black protests. And they realized that while the white society, using their weaponry advantage of guns and cannons, were able to enslave Africans and bring them to America, they could not sustain peace with Africans indefinitely. Because after a while, when people are oppressed for long term, their collective aggressions towards the oppressors will continue to grow until acts of rebellion happens. This was happening during the 60s. So they recognized they had to shift black collective aggressions away from the white society and redirect it against ourselves. This is why we're constantly hearing about black and black crime, black and black crime, black and black crime. It's designed to manipulate us to believe that we are our worst enemies. We are our worst enemies. We are being subliminally programmed to believe we are our worst enemies, and we're therefore need whites to govern over our lives. Subliminally, through propaganda, through media. They keep showing black and black crime not because they care about blacks killing blacks, because they want to keep our collective aggression shifted against them. Even when they say black people are only 13.5% of the population, when you watch those criminal shows, you see a disproportionate amount of black crimes. You see a disproportionate amount of blacks killing blacks. That's a method used for subduing unified black protests. The goal is to keep our collective aggression shifted away from the white society and redirected against ourselves. Social scientists describe this as instilling a value system into the collective minds of black people that serves and protects the system of white supremacy. We must wake up to our reality. We must elevate our minds above a biblical fairy tale. Those of us who insist that the Bible is going to save us, I want you to critically think. The Bible was brutally beaten into the blood-soaked minds of our ancestors by those who enslaved them, raped them, tortured them, murdered them, castrated them. Those are the people who gave us the Bible. To say that the Bible that was brutally forced upon our enslaved ancestors would set us free is an idiotic way of thinking. You are not thinking straight. The Bible was not written by Africans. The Bible was written by Romans. Romans who engaged in bestiality, sodomy, homosexuality, massive orgies, and death sports. And they continued these practices even after writing the Bible. The fact that the Bible was written by these people and a group of people who have proven themselves as being the most ungodliest people throughout history totally disqualifies the Bible from being the true words of God. The mere fact that the Bible strongly condones slavery totally disqualifies it from being the true words of God. We have to elevate our minds above believing in things that insult our intelligence. Our plight has nothing to do with a Bible written by our enemies. Our condition has nothing to do with a silly slave syndrome myth. There are social sciences that the white society deploys to keep our minds shifted away from the white society. It keeps us demoralized and divided because it makes us easier to control. Now, to give you a illustrated, verbal illustration of how it works, how you control people through immense demoralization. Imagine that you have a people aboard a ship, okay? And these people are constantly being fed negative information about themselves. That their ship is slowly sinking, that a mutiny is being planned, that their crew is incompetent. After a while, continuously receiving these negative information, they become besieged by the negative information. They start internalizing them, and they start hating each other, distrusting each other. And they may jump into the water and dive toward those who are taunting them, believing that there's something inherently wrong with them. This is how the white society controls us. Many black people get so demoralized with their negative perceptions of ourselves that we want to try to show whites that we're not all bad, we're not all bad. Those narrative affects us, even when we listen to our comedians. A black comedian will get on stage and say, you know what, when I loan money out, I prefer loaning money to white people because black people won't pay you back. I trust white people, not black people. We function not based upon our reality. We function based upon the narratives that are fed into a society. A society does not function based upon facts nor reality. It functions based upon the narratives that are fed into a society. And the white society controls those narratives. And those narratives are distorted to exalt whites and to marginalize black people. We have to understand this. Something else happened in the 1960s. The white society's mistreatment of black people, those images of black people being mistreated went around the world and it eroded America's global image. America recognized that to continue its mistreatment of black people, they had to manufacture consent to do so. So they used the media to vilify and criminalize and denigrate our image, to make others insensitive to our plight, to dehumanize us and make others insensitive to us. And those are the images that how people interact with us based upon those images. This is why we are perceived as the group that's the most violent, when in reality, the most violent group are white people. The reality is this: more violent crimes are committed by whites than any other group in America. More white men are killed by white men than any other group in America. More white cops have been killed by white people than by black people. But you have this support is that supporting black people is being against cops. Our views against cops because cops disproportionately kills us, even though most cops are killed by white men. The largest recipient of welfare are white people. The largest benefactors of affirmative action are white women. And in spite of a brutal history of racism and slavery, most inventions that revolutionized the world were either invented by black people or were inspired directly by inventions by black people. These narratives are kept from the masses because these true narratives, would erode the system of white supremacy. The white supremacy sits upon a throne of white exalting lies. And those lies give them their power because people believe those lies. This is another reason why they fight against true history being taught within our schools. They have to keep those false narratives forward because their power sits upon those lies. Self-hating blacks are those who accept the lies and function based upon the lies. When a black man goes around calling himself a nigger and a bitch and sagging his pants, he thinks that's his own swag. That's not his swag. That's a swag that was created by white men through negative social engineering. And the black man in his ignorant state imitated, became those derogatory media depictions of himself that he accepted as being his reality. They show us a negative perception of ourselves to condition us to accept, to function based upon a subordinate side. It's also by deliberate design when they show the African slaves, they're all black. When they show the African kings of Egypt, they're all white. It instills within our mind a value system that supports a system of white supremacy. Until black people wake up and recognize that their information warfare has been waged against us. Information warfare that is designed to make us think in ways that are against our own interests and it supports the interests of the white society. Until we recognize it and develop counter strategies against it. We must recognize what's happening to us. These concerns I'm expressing to you is never given a national platform because the white society learned a long time ago, the 1960s, that it was by giving our true leaders a media platform that their popularity grew, that their ideologies grew. So now they only give their black puppets platforms in the national media, those who they control. So you don't hear this kind of dialogue. We are not niggers and bitches. We are the people who civilize the world. We are the people. The largest wall is not the Great Wall of China. The largest wall is the wall in Nigeria. You don't know this stuff because the white man doesn't teach it. Because he psychologically conditions us to perceive ourselves through a marginalized identity. He cannot teach you that we civilized them, we educated them, and yet maintain his dominance. So he gives you a distorted perception. And that distorted perception makes you accept calling yourself a nigger. Brothers and sisters, it's time to learn the social sciences that the white society deploys against us. Although most of us don't face the type of blatant white racism that our ancestors faced, we still face white racism. White racism is now deployed with much more sophistication. Unlike the blatant system of racism that black people can easily recognize and identify, and therefore unify ourselves against, this modern racism is covert, not easily comprehended or recognized by its black victims. The old type of racism, you could get a black man who was perhaps mildly retarded. And you could tell him, don't go across the tracks at night. If you go across the tracks at night, the white man gonna kill you. And that person could understand instead, don't go across the tracks. But this type of racism is so sophisticated that many black people not only don't recognize it, we contribute to it. We support rappers, for example. Rappers who vilify our image, criminalize our image, and are being used by white oppressive forces to negatively steer our culture. The ruling white elites perceive our rappers as idiots and buffoons that actually benefit the system of white supremacy. In addition to exploiting them, making millions off of them, they use them to negatively steer our culture and to criminalize our image. Think about it. Black men are justifying calling our women bitches and hoes. Justify glorifying pimps. Pimps who denigrate women in the worst way possible. Our minds have been turned upside down, and we are justifying these ignorant behaviors. We are justifying defending a Bible beat into the minds of our ancestors. We are justifying calling ourselves nigger sense and empowers us when it doesn't. Our core problem is that the ignorant ones are overconfident, and the intelligent ones feels overwhelmed and intimidated by the ignorant ones, and we remain quiet. And this allows the beliefs of the ignorant and feeble-minded ones to spread through our communities, mentally enslaving us all. It's time to wake up. It's time to function based upon our reality. One love and peace, brothers. This is Franklin Jones, the author of The Black People's Matrix. The Matrix is truly about us.